The sun had long since dipped behind the hills when the doors of the inn creaked open to the dark. Outside, the wind had begun to hum low and steady, like an old man's tune without words. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the sweet, sour perfume of ale. The hearth crackled in the center of the room, spitting sparks that danced briefly before vanishing into soot-blackened rafters. This was the hour when the world slowed, but the inn began to stir. A crooked sign had swung on rusty hinges out front, showing a faded tankard painted in ochre and red. The Fox and Lantern. It was called, though few paid it any mind. Names didn't matter much after dusk. Not to the tired feet that crossed the threshold, not to the hands that reached for the warmth of a mug or the cradle of firelight. Men shuffled in first. Farmhands, shepherds, millers with white dust on their boots. They muttered greetings, some with nods, most with nothing. They dropped coins on the counter like dropping stones into a well, each clink marking a day's end. The innkeeper, broad and red-nosed, nodded back with the practiced boredom of someone who had poured 1,000 mugs and would pour 1,000 more. His wife, round and brisk, slipped through the crowd like a ghost with bread and stew, arms always full, words always few. A pot of something thick and brown simmered on the hearth, sending up the scent of turnips and salt pork. Tables creaked beneath elbows and tankards. Boots scraped against the rushes strewn across the floor. Voices rose, but not high yet. The night was still young, and the ale had just begun to loosen tongues. In the corner sat a fiddler with one good eye and fingers like bent twigs. He tuned his strings slowly, eyes half closed, waiting for the hush between rounds. When it came, he played, not a lively reel at first, but a low, winding tune that curled like smoke through the rafters. A drinking song in no hurry to end. Strangers shared benches, knees bumping, coats brushing. No one knew names. They didn't need to. In the tavern, you were your story or your silence. One man had a scar that cut his cheek like a cracked jug. Another wore a feather in his cap, a faded peacock plume that said he'd seen cities, or wanted you to think he had. A third snored already in the corner, head tilted back, mouth wide, an unfinished cup in his hand. The room grew louder as mugs emptied. Laughter joined the fiddle, and the songs turned body. Not cruel, just old, handed down like spoons or tales. Someone slapped a hand to the table in time with the beat, and others followed. The fire popped. The air rippled with heat and sound. A merchant, his purse lighter than he liked, tried to sing along, slurring half the words and inventing the rest. A washerwoman cackled at his effort, tossing her head back, revealing a neck lined like worn parchment. She sang louder, clearer, her voice sharp as winter air, and the room cheered her on. By the door, a boy no older than 12 played with the ashes, drawing circles with a stick, ignored by all. He'd run messages that day, or fetched water, or maybe just followed his mother into the warmth. No one asked, but he knew the songs. He mouthed them silently, eyes wide, soaking up every word and tone. Upstairs, the rooms filled one by one. Narrow beds stuffed with straw and dreams. Travelers curled on blankets that smelled of other men. The snores began like distant thunder, low and irregular, building in chorus as the night deepened. Through the thin wooden walls came muffled hiccups, sighs, a muttered prayer, a belch. Somewhere, someone wept softly. Not all nights ended in laughter. Downstairs, the fire burned lower. The song slowed again. A lull came over the room, like a breath held long and then let go. The fiddler leaned back, eyes closed, bow resting on his lap. One man had passed out with his face in a stew. Another held a tankard to his chest like a child clutches a toy. The innkeeper lit another lantern, its glow yellow and flickering. He walked slowly among the tables, collecting mugs, checking for coins left behind. His wife swept up crumbs with her apron, nudging boots that had stopped moving hours ago. They did not speak much. Their rhythm was as old as the inn. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling shutters and pushing against the door. The candlelight inside danced in answer, and the shadows on the wall swayed like drunks trying to find their feet. A dog curled beneath a bench let out a sigh, long and shuddering, and went back to sleep. There were no clocks here. Time passed by the way the fires sank, by the way voices faded, by the number of tankards emptied and filled again. The night stretched long, wrapped in warmth and smell, and the weight of stories only half told. A man in a dark hood leaned in to whisper something to another. Perhaps a deal, perhaps a lie. A silver coin exchanged hands under the table. The other man nodded slowly, tucking it away. Eyes met, then turned away again. Not everything said in and stayed in song. A woman near the fire began to hum. Just a thread of melody, barely there, but clear enough to hush the fiddler strings. Her voice carried the weight of tired feet, of cold water drawn before sunrise, of bread kneaded with silent hands. Others listened, not because she demanded it, but because silence asked for it. When she stopped, no one clapped. They just breathed together. Upstairs, one of the beds creaked with too much motion. Then laughter. Then quiet. A snore, a curse, another snore. The straw mattress took it all. The night wore on. Some still drank, slower now, cradling the tankards like old friends. Others sat with eyes half closed, heads against the wall, not yet ready to sleep, but too tired to speak. The innkeeper lit another candle, the last. He placed it near the hearth and watched the flame. His wife poured the final round for the two smiths who'd come in late, their hands still black with soot. They drank without speaking, staring into the fire like it held the answers to questions they hadn't yet asked. The fire had burned low now, just embers glowing like buried rubies. Smoke drifted in lazy ribbons upward. The fiddler had packed his strings and tucked them away. He leaned against the wall, mouth open, snoring gently. The woman with the strong voice had gone to bed. The merchant lay face down across two stools. The washerwoman had curled on a bench with her shawl over her head, her mouth still shaped like she might be telling a joke in her sleep. The boy by the fire had fallen over, arms around his knees, cheek against the floor. He dreamed of songs with no end, of inns that never closed, of nights lit by flame and filled with voices. And outside, the moon rose high. The village was silent, but for the creak of the sign in the wind. No one called out. No footsteps rang on stone. The world, too, had gone to bed. But inside the inn, the night lingered. In the warmth of the coals, in the smell of beer-soaked wood, in the murmurs and shifting shapes of sleepers. The stories would wait for morning. The mugs would be scrubbed, the floors swept. But for now, the fox and lantern slept with them all, cradling their dreams in its wooden ribs. There would be more songs tomorrow, more spilled ale, more boots stomping in and laughter rising like smoke. But tonight belonged to the hush between snores and the echo of a woman's song, to the crackle of fire and the soft breath of sleep, to a night in a medieval inn, noisy, smelly, sacred in its own way. In a world without clocks, the tavern kept time by its own heartbeat. Slow, steady, spilled and sung. And when the rooster crowed far off, long before light touched the eaves, the inn began to wake again. But not yet. Not now. Now the night still reigned. In the Fox and Lantern, it was peaceful, in the kind of way that only comes after too much ale and not enough beds. After the last song fades, and the last secret slips from lips too loose to hold it. The kind of peace that comes with snoring strangers and drunken songs. And the fire, low but faithful, burning on. The sun dipped behind the trees like it always did, slow, unbothered, bleeding gold across the muddy track that led to the village. Smoke curled from thatched rooftops, a few dogs barked in the distance, and boots made the only honest sound on stone. But there was one place, just at the bend near the old oak, where the world didn't go quiet when the sun slipped away. That place was the inn, wood-planked, crooked in the corners, with shutters that creaked in the breeze, and a lantern swinging from a post out front like it had something to say. Some called it the Cock and Bramble, others forgot its name entirely. It didn't matter. The name changed with the keeper, with the years, with the travelers who misheard and retold it in the next town over. What didn't change was this. Once night fell, it breathed. In daylight, it looked like a tired old building, leaning a little too far, patched with moss, doors sticky from spills never cleaned proper. But when the sky darkened and the hearth was stoked, then lit up from the inside like a secret. Lanterns glowed against leaded windows. Shadows moved behind curtains, and every now and again, the sound of laughter or the strain of a fiddle slid out through the cracks in the walls. Folks trickled in by twos and threes, boots worn, shoulders heavy, faces dull with the day's labor. There was no schedule to it, no tolling bell or posted time. They came when the fields were done, the carts stowed, the gates locked. Men with hay on their tunics, women with flour on their aprons, shepherd boys with red faces from wind. They didn't speak much when they entered, not at first. They just nodded or mumbled or raised a hand halfway. And still, somehow, the air shifted when the latch clicked shut behind them. The room was never empty, not truly. There was always someone there before, holding cord in the corner or warming their feet at the fire. A merchant finishing his stew. An old man with eyes closed but ears sharp. A dog curled under a bench, tail thumping in his sleep at the scent of new feet. By the hearth, the pot always simmered. Whatever it held that day, turnip, barley, mutton scraps, cabbage, it sent up its scent like a welcome. Not rich, not fancy, but warm, real. It was the smell of survival, of company, of old things shared. The innkeeper's hands were busy always. Tankards to fill, loaves to slice, ash to brush from the hearth. His voice came and went, sometimes barked, sometimes soft, depending on who he was dealing with. He knew them all, or thought he did. Knew when to pour a full mug without asking. Knew when to let a man sit quiet without prodding. Knew when a woman had had a hard day and needed stew before small talk. There were no tables to call your own. You took what space was left. Sat next to a man whose name you might not learn. Share bread with a stranger who might share nothing else. And that was fine. They had made space for both stories and silences. Someone always started the first song. Never the same someone. Sometimes the fiddler, sometimes the blacksmith daughter with a voice like spring mud, thick and rich and catching you by surprise. Sometimes a boy who didn't know all the words but sang them anyway, bold as brass. And once it began, the room began to breathe. The laughter didn't crash all at once. It rolled in slow, like a tide, starting as a chuckle, then a murmur, and finally a roar that made the rafters tremble. A joke passed down the bench. A story retold for the 50th time, funnier now for its wear. Ill helped, of course. It loosened tongues and softened tempers, turned curses into grins, made even the coldest faces break into a smile when the mug was raised for the third time. Not everyone drank. Some just listened, sat close to the fire, and soaked up the noise. Let the sound wrap around them like a second coat. One old woman came every week and never spoke a word. Just sat near the fire, knitting something that never seemed to grow, eyes half closed, smile playing at her lips. Folks said she'd buried 2 husbands and now preferred the company of strangers who didn't ask questions. Peddlers sometimes came, laying out their wares on a bench near the door. Tiny pots of honey, needles wrapped in cloth, charms against fever. They talked fast and loud, louder with every mug, until someone told them to hush or the innkeeper waved them off. But even they added to the life of it all, a kind of noise that meant the night was unfolding as it should. Children came too, now and then. They weren't supposed to stay long, but no one sent them off if they behaved. They'd sit wide-eyed by the fire, listening to grown folks talk of foxes that walked on 2 legs, of men who turned into crows at night, of queens who died in disguise and were buried beneath stables. The truth didn't matter. The telling did. Every so often, a traveler with a cloak too fine or boots too clean would come in, looking sideways, nose twitching. They'd sit on the edge of a bench, fingers wrapped tight around a mug they didn't drink, waiting for the moment to leave. But sometimes they stayed, got pulled into a song or caught in a game of dice, or simply warmed by the stew and the noise and the smell of earth and bodies that made the place feel real. And when the fiddler bow finally moved, it was as if the whole room leaned toward him. His tunes weren't always pretty. Some screeched like an owl in heat. Others floated like smoke. But they made feet tap and shoulders sway. Some songs made folks clap in time. Others brought tears that no one mocked. Music was the breath between words in that place. The inn's walls didn't hold paintings or fancy carvings, just hooks with cloaks, a few dried herbs hanging near the hearth, maybe an old shield or two, bent and dented. But when the room was full and the voices rose, you could have sworn you were sitting in a cathedral of laughter. Arguments came, of course. They always did. Someone accused of cheating at dice, a spilled mug, a joke gone too far, voices raised, hands clenched, but more often than not, a sharp word from the innkeeper or a glare from the old woman near the fire ended it before it began. And when it didn't, fists might fly, but even then, the fight ended with ale spilled and pride bruised, not bones. Upstairs, the rooms were few and tight. Straw mattresses, rough wool blankets, walls thin enough to hear a man's snores from 3 doors away. But downstairs, that was where the life stayed, where strangers sat elbow to elbow and talked like kin, where the fire never quite went out and the tankards never quite emptied. And when midnight crept near, the songs slowed. The laughter softened. Some leaned against the wall, heads tilted, mouths open. Others lay their heads on folded arms, dreams already tugging at their heels. The fire burned low, embers glowing like coals in a blacksmith's forge. The air smelled of smoke and stew and ale and old wood and of stories. So many stories. No one declared the night done. It just faded gently. A mug set down for the last time. A candle blown out. A yawn that spread like a ripple. And still the inn breathed. Even as the snores began, even as the stools emptied, it held that breath. As if waiting for the next step on the stone, for the next knock at the door, for the next song that would rise and fill it all again. Because the inn wasn't just a place. It was a pulse. A rhythm kept alive by boots and songs and a shared quiet after laughter. It was where the world went to rest, to forget, to remember. And it waited every night, patient and warm, ready to breathe again. The sky had long since turned black, though no one in the inn cared much for the sky once the door had closed behind them. What mattered now was firelight and the clatter of mugs, the steam curling from the stew pot, and the sound of voices, layered and rolling like a river after a thaw. Night at the inn didn't arrive gently. It burst through the door with muddy boots, red cheeks, aching feet, and stories ripe from the day. And once it came, there was no telling where it might go. You could never guess what the evening might hold once the benches filled and the tankards were poured. Some nights began slow, quiet even, like an old dog warming by the hearth. But give it time, let the ale flow, and it would shift. Suddenly, everyone had something to say. About the weather. About the Lord's steward and his poor taste in boots. About the way Tom's pig got into the garden again and ruined half the turnips. Nothing was too small for discussion, and nothing was too big to mock. The voices layered over each other. Deep laughs, high shrieks, a mother's gentle scold, a lover's hushed word. If you sat in the middle of the room, the noise wrapped around you like a thick blanket. If you stood near the wall, you could hear the pieces. One woman arguing about the price of barley, a young man boasting of a fight he almost won, a child pretending to be a wolf under the table. The fire cracked in its place like applause, and the candlelight shimmered on greasy mugs. You'd hear someone slam their tankard down, not in anger, just to punctuate a sentence. Someone else would sing half a verse of a song, forget the words, and laugh so hard he choked on his bread. Another might lean too far in their chair and fall flat, legs in the air. Nobody helped them up right away. Not out of cruelty, but because they were laughing too hard. There were flirtations too, some bold, some bashful. A wink across the bench. A rough hand brushing another beneath the table. Eyes lingering longer than the conversation demanded. Sometimes it ended with a shared corner upstairs. Other times, just a song sung a little sweeter than necessary. The inn at night was thick with longing and too much courage. It wasn't all joy and laughter. Tears had their place too. The kind that snuck up mid-conversation and left a man silent for minutes, staring into his mug. Or the quiet sob of a woman in the back, her friend's arm around her shoulder. No one asked too many questions. That was the gift of the night. The freedom to break without explaining, to feel without apology. If someone cried, someone else poured them another drink and made sure they got home, or stayed until they could smile again. Arguments flared quickly, like sparks in dry straw. Words turned sharp over spilled ale or a misplaced joke. Fists sometimes followed. The benches might tip, a bowl go flying, curses thrown like stones. But it ended as fast as it began. The innkeeper had a look that could freeze blood, and no one wanted to face his wrath. Besides, the inn was sacred in its own chaotic way. You could fight the world, but here, you made peace, or at least didn't make too much trouble. Every face was marked by the day. Dirt on their sleeves, soot in their hair, lines around their eyes that told stories no words ever could. Some had walked for miles. Some came every night. Some only showed when the grief was too much to bear alone. Yet once they passed through the door, they became part of the same great noise, the same beating heart of shared exhaustion and stubborn joy. Children, when allowed, became shadows darting between boots and legs. They played games in the corners, whispered secrets, giggled at grown-up things they half understood. If one started crying, anyone would lift them, bounce them on a knee, offer them bread or a story. It didn't matter whose child it was. At night, in the inn, everyone belonged to everyone. The smell of the place was part of the music. Ale, smoke, onion, sweat, damp wool, dog fur, and once in a while, violets, on the wrist of a woman who'd saved her last petal for the evening. It wasn't sweet, not exactly, but it was honest. And after a while, it smelled like comfort. The stories came easy. Sometimes wild lies, sometimes truth so strange no one believed it. A man with a scar might tell of a bear he wrestled. A toothless baker might recall the night she danced with a knight who never removed his helm. A woman in a red shawl could whisper of ghosts in the woods and the boy who followed them and never returned. People listened, nodded, laughed, gasped. It didn't matter if it was true. What mattered was the telling. There were nights when someone brought a drum or a pipe, and the songs took over. Feet stomped, hands clapped, voices rose in ragged harmony. One moment, a love ballad slow and aching. The next, a rowdy tune about sheep that wasn't really about sheep at all. Folks spun in circles, tripped, laughed, caught each other. The floor shook with the dance. Someone always sang too loud. Someone always tried to harmonize and failed. And someone always forgot the final verse and made it up, sending the room into wheezing laughter. As the night deepened, the room changed. The loudness softened, not vanished, just gentled. Conversations became murmurs. Songs became lullabies. A man might lean his head on the table and snore with his mouth open. Another might start a sentence and forget halfway, eyes drooping. Still, a few clung to the noise like a lifeline. One more story, one more drink, one more song. It was in these late hours that the strange things happened. A woman might stand and start to sing alone, a melody that made everyone quiet. A man might confess something long buried to a stranger. Two enemies might find they shared the same memory. Or someone might start dancing by themselves, eyes closed, lost in the warmth of it all. No one judged. Not at night. The day judged. The day expected. The night forgave. Upstairs, bodies curled in a straw and wool, some alone, some not. You could hear snoring like a storm, or soft breathing, or quiet crying. The floors creaked with every step, and the shutters banged if the wind picked up. But downstairs, the fires still glowed. Someone always stayed behind a little longer. Someone always had one more thing to say. Sometimes a dog barked outside. Sometimes the door opened with a gust of cold, and a latecomer would enter, half frozen and wide-eyed. And though the room was half asleep, someone would always slide a bowl across the table and nod toward the fire. No questions, just welcome. And when sleep finally settled over the last bench, when the fire gave its final pop, when even the drunkards had quieted, the inn held all of it. The laughter, the weeping, the spilled drinks and off-key songs, the smell of stew, the heat of bodies, the rawness of hearts laid bare. All of it lingered in the walls like breath caught in the wood. No one remembered every detail come morning. Faces blurred, words faded, but something stayed. A warmth in the chest, a soft ache in the legs, a silence that felt full, not empty, as if the noise had given way to peace. And so it went, night after night. Loud, human, unscripted, a place where strangers became companions, where grief and joy shared a bench, where even the loneliest soul could find themselves surrounded by life so loud it drowned out the dark. Not perfect, not polished, but real, and real was more than enough. By now, the candles had melted low in their holders, dripping wax like slow tears. The benches were scratched and worn, but they held the weight of generations. Some of the carvings etched into the wood were so old, even the innkeeper didn't know who made them. A name here, a date there, a heart with 2 letters that might have belonged to lovers long since buried. The wood knew the secrets of the night and kept them well. Sometimes the innkeeper's wife would appear with a blanket, draping it over a sleeping traveler who hadn't made it upstairs. Other times, she'd collect the empty bowls and mugs, humming a tune only she seemed to know. She moved like someone who'd done this 1,000 nights, because she had. Her presence soothed the room without needing words. It was said she could calm a brawl just by appearing with a damp rag and a raised eyebrow. The hearth would glow low, licking the logs in slow orange. Shadows danced on the walls like old spirits, not malevolent, but watching, listening, maybe even remembering the echoes of nights before. You could feel the age of the place in your bones. How many feet had crossed that floor? How many voices had risen in song or fury or grief? Tom didn't march here. It sat down and joined the table. Some said the inn was a kind of church, not for prayers but for truth. A place where people took off more than their cloaks, where they shed burdens just for the night, where lies softened and truths hardened, and sometimes both were poured into the same cup. A knight once confessed, in the deep hush before dawn, that he had never truly fought. His sword had never seen blood, but he bore himself like a hero because that's what the world needed. And the shepherd beside him had nodded, understanding more than he could say. They didn't speak again, but they drank together until the fire cracked loud enough to end the silence. A midwife once danced until her feet bled, laughing like a girl, though her hands had delivered more children than she could count. She said it was the only place she didn't feel like death's shadow. That night, they let her dance as long as she pleased. And once, on a winter's night, so cold the mugs steamed as soon as they were filled, a thief returned the ring he had stolen weeks before. He didn't say a word, just slid it across the table to the old man who had cried over its loss. The old man said nothing either, just held it in his palm like a piece of his youth had come home. You didn't always notice the moments when they happened. The big ones hid behind small things. A shared cup, a caught glance, a song sung in 2 voices instead of 1. But the inn remembered. It tucked those moments into its beams and floorboards, stored them away like wine aging in the cellar. By the final hours, when even the rowdiest souls had given in to the weight of their limbs, a quiet settled. Not the silence of emptiness, but of fullness. A peace that came not from the absence of noise, but from the knowledge that the noise had served its purpose. It had released the pressure of the day, cracked open the ribs, let the heart breathe. You could walk the inn then and hear different music. The gentle wheeze of sleeping breath. The groan of the building as it cooled. The occasional snore so loud it made the shutters rattle. A muttered dream word from someone lost in sleep. All of it. The aftermath of joy, of sorrow, of too much ale and too much life. The fire burned low, barely more than coals. And yet, it glowed just enough to cast a warmth over the few who still sat near it, shoulders touching, eyes heavy, but unwilling to let go just yet. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. In the inn at night, words were like spices. You used them when needed, but too much spoiled the stew. Outside, the night remained a dark blanket, stitched with stars and the occasional cry of an owl. Sometimes a fox's scream would split the dark, wild and eerie, and someone would stir and murmur, old spirits walking again. But no one was afraid. Not here. The walls were thick, the fire faithful, the presence of others a kind of shield. Come morning, the magic would vanish. It always did. Dawn stripped the night of its softness. The benches would be wiped, the floors swept, the mugs scrubbed clean of laughter and tears. The innkeeper would open the shutters with a grunt, letting in the chill of the day. And the patrons would rise, stretch aching limbs, and return to their lives. Fields, forges, kitchens, roads. Their footsteps would carry them outward again, scattering like crows from a bell. But for that one night, every night, they had gathered like moths to the flame, shared something wordless, something essential, and it would happen again, just as surely as the sun would set. Because even in a world of toil and silence, of rules and structure and hunger and want, people still needed one thing most of all: a place to be human. Loudly, softly, stupidly, bravely, clumsily, fully. And the inn at night was that place. A wooden bowl held more than stew. It held secrets. A crooked bench bore more than weight. It bore witness. A spilled drink washed away more than a stain. It erased a bad day, a bitter memory, a loneliness too long carried. So many souls, so many nights, stacked one upon the other like pages in a story never written down, yet never forgotten. If the walls could speak, they wouldn't whisper, they'd roar. But they don't need to speak. The snoring stranger in the corner, dreaming of who knows what, the barmaid wiping down the counter, lips pursed in a tune only she knows, the traveler asleep with one boot still on. Mouth open, face soft for the first time in days, they say it all. This was the symphony of the inn at night. Raw, raucous, real. No two nights were the same, but each one was true. And that was enough to keep the fire burning, night after night, as long as stories needed telling, and people needed reminding that they were not alone. Not in laughter, not in sorrow, not even in snoring. Just human, together, in the night. The night had stretched long, and the laughter had dulled to a gentle hum. Outside, the wind passed quietly through the eaves, whispering secrets to the thatch. Inside, the inn had begun to breathe differently. The kind of breath that came slow and deep, like an old dog curling beside the hearth. The fire was still burning, but no longer lively. It glowed steady and low, its heart warm and constant. It was in that hour, just after the last song, just before sleep claimed the stragglers, that the inn entered another world. A softer one, a quieter one. It wasn't sleep yet, not quite. It was the hush between moments, the part of the night when time did not march but sat down to rest its feet. You could feel in your bones if you paid attention. The weight of the ale had settled in bellies and limbs, and the wildness of earlier had melted into contentment. The big voices had gone silent. The clanging mugs had stilled. No one shouted anymore. No one begged for another round. The players had set down their lutes, and the dice had stopped tumbling across the boards. The inn, once loud with life, now cradled it gently in the crook of its arm. Some called this hour holy, not for the saints, but for the silence. For the way it wrapped around each soul like a woolen blanket, hand-woven and soft with memory. It wasn't sacred like a church was sacred. It was sacred like sleep or breath or the hush that comes after a child's first cry. It was sacred in the way it held everyone, not apart but together. The innkeeper, gray-bearded and slow-moving now, would lean against the counter and simply watch. Not with eyes full of suspicion, but with the gentle gaze of someone who had seen 100 nights like this and knew the blessing of each one. His wife, never far, would sit with her hands in her lap, the firelight soft on her cheekbones, her shoulders finally at rest. They wouldn't speak unless they had to. They didn't need to. Their silence was practiced and full. On the benches and the floor, against the hearth and beneath tables, folk lay in crooked postures, boots off, heads back, arms folded or flung carelessly like leaves. Some were still upright, blinking slowly at the fire. A few sat close together, talking not with words but with eyes and small, knowing nods. Lovers, maybe, or strangers sharing a wound they hadn't named yet. No one left. Not yet. Even those who could have stood and walked into the night chose not to. It was as though the walls had softened and the air had thickened, making movement a kind of sacrilege. You didn't rush the end of a night like this. You let it settle. You let it wrap around you. And you gave it your stillness in return. Time, in the inn at this hour, didn't tick. It swayed. It breathed. The minutes didn't pass, they hovered. If you listened closely, you might even hear it. Time itself, humming gently in the wood beams or breathing through the cracks in the shutters. It had slowed down, not because of weariness, but because the inn had asked it to. No one ever said so out loud. That would have broken the spell. But they all felt it, even the ones half drunk and half dreaming. That something sacred was happening, something worth preserving, even if no one could quite name it. A kind of belonging that didn't need explanation. A mother sleeping with her child across her lap. A bard slumped over his lute, fingers still curled around a note he hadn't finished. A mason with one hand resting on a mug and the other on his knee, eyes closed, brow soft. Even the dog curled by the hearth seemed to understand. He didn't twitch or bark, just sighed, long and low as if saying, yes, this is right. The shadows moved with the firelight, slow and easy. They stretched across the walls like dreams, like old stories retold in silence. Each one held something, a memory, maybe, or a moment lived by someone long gone, but not forgotten. Then had seen them all. The fights and the laughter, the kisses and the curses, the deals struck and promises broken. But in this hour, none of that mattered. All of it dissolved into stillness. It wasn't just a pause. It was a kind of presence. Everyone who sat or slept or simply breathed within those walls became part of it. Then didn't just hold them, it became them. The timber and stone soaked up their size, their warmth, their peace. And it gave something back, a hush that reached into the marrow. A quiet that said, you are safe here. You belong. A traveling monk once said that the Spirit of God lived not just in churches, but in any place where souls gathered in love or sorrow. He said the inn was holy ground because it was where people let down their burdens. Not always neatly, not always quietly, but truly. And that truth, even when messy, had power. He had fallen asleep that night beneath a window, his hands still wrapped around a crust of bread, his head tilted to the stars he could barely see. And when he woke, he wrote a prayer in the dust on the table. Not in Latin, not in verse, just a few plain words, thank you for letting me rest. The innkeeper didn't wipe it away for weeks. There were nights when the stillness was interrupted, someone coughing, a bottle knocked over, a bad dream muttered into the dark. But the quiet always returned, patient and sure. It wasn't afraid to wait. It knew its place, knew that when the world tired of noise, it would come back to this, to the hush, to the sacred slow. The strangest thing about that hour was how it didn't feel lonely. You'd think with so many people sprawled and slumped and silent, it might feel empty. But it didn't. It felt full, rich, like the moments after a feast when no one speaks because their hearts are as full as their bellies. Like the moment after a birth, when the baby has cried and the mother smiles through tears and the room holds its breath in awe. It was that kind of stillness, deep and human and good. The old clock on the wall, if there was one, never chimed during this hour. It knew better. If it did, someone would stop it. Or maybe it had broken long ago, and no one had bothered to fix it. What use was time here, anyway? For in that hour, the inn was timeless. And so it stayed, night after night, holding its sleepers and singers, its sinners and saints. It watched over them not with sternness, but with love. A quiet, steady kind. The kind that asked nothing, expected nothing, but was always there. When the sky outside began to pale, just slightly, just a breath, the stillness began to loosen its grip. Not all at once. Gently, like a mother lifting a sleeping child, careful not to wake them too soon. A breeze might stir, a rooster might mutter, a foot might twitch, and slowly, the inn began to breathe again in a new rhythm. Not wild, not loud, but no longer the sacred hush of night. The spell broke, not because it was weak, but because it had served its purpose. Folk would rise, rubbing eyes, stretching arms, murmuring to each other in sleep-heavy voices. The fire would be stoked, bread would be warmed, boots would be found, and just like that, the day would begin. But for those who had felt the stillness, who had surrendered to it, something lingered. A softness in the chest, a steadiness in the step, the memory of being held, for just a little while, in the arms of something bigger than themselves. They'd carry that with them, into the fields, into the cities, into the loneliness and the noise. And maybe, just maybe, it would call them back again one day. Back to the inn, back to the night, back to the sacred slow.